What is going on, everyone? Welcome into the reveal of, I suppose, both the number 2 and number 1 teams in my power rankings for this deep dive series that is just about done here. We're going to talk about the Bengals here today, the Chiefs tomorrow, and then we get to watch the Chiefs. We made it. Congrats, everybody, for making it through the summer. Football season is here, baby. Excited to get into the Bengals here today, a team with big expectations to hopefully get back to the Super Bowl as they did in 2021. They got close again last year, hoping to get over the hump and get Joe Burrow another piece of jewelry. This is a really balanced team, not a ton of weaknesses. So they're close, man. They're really close. I do want to say before we get started, for those that have followed the series religiously, you have noticed that some of the position rankings that we show throughout this series have had repeat numbers. And that's because naturally, I make these rankings back in May. And throughout the course of the summer, we've had injuries, free agent signings, trades, retirements, you name it. Not to mention, I'm also watching film, collecting new information, and some of my opinions on guys might change slightly. So that's all reflected throughout the course of the summer. I just want to say that if you want the full list of updated rankings, I'll be dropping my full spreadsheet on my Patreon, so you can play around with all the rankings, sort through it, whatever needs you have with it. It will be available there on my Patreon. That link is in the description below. I will say the individual player grades are not going to be in that spreadsheet unless any of you psychopaths want to go ahead and plug in all those for me. I obviously haven't had time to do that in a spreadsheet here, but anyway, let's get into it. As always, starting by looking at this Bengals team's offseason. We're going to go through the coaching staff and every position group, talk about if they got better, worse, or stayed the same. And fortunately for the Bengals, with the coaching staff, they get to stay the same. They are the only team in my top tier of top 4 teams that did not lose or get anybody poached from their coaching staff, which tends to happen when you're on top of the league. So some added continuity gives them a little bit of a feather in their cap against some of these other teams. But then in terms of the roster, with quarterback, really no change. They did swap backups, but whatever. Neutral at QB. Running back, slightly downgraded. They do lose Samaje Perine to the Broncos, got a decent-sized contract, but they do bring in the athletic Chase Brown in the 5th round out of Illinois. With the tight end room, I struggled whether to have this as slightly downgraded or just leave it as neutral. If it was just swapping Hayden Hurst for Irv Smith, which they did, I would say slightly downgraded, but they do get Drew Sample back, who's not completely useless for this team. It's not like Hayden Hurst was some superstar. I think they'll be just fine there, so ultimately I left that as neutral. Wide receiver, also keeping this as neutral for the purposes of this season, but they did future-proof this group a little bit. They do lose Trent Taylor, their return man, but they bring in especially Charlie Jones in the 4th round. I think could be a potential long-term slot replacement for Tyler Boyd. But also Andre Yosevich, who's had a good preseason. So some nice day 3 picks. Probably not going to make an impact on this team's season this year, but and we're leaving it at neutral for that reason. But not to say they ignored the room entirely. Offensive line, this is obviously upgraded. They lose nobody and add Orlando Brown at left tackle, Cody Ford as O-line depth, and then just addition by subtraction. I suppose they did lose somebody technically, but not having to be in a scenario at all ever where you have to put Hakeem Adeniji on the field is a plus for this offensive line. So pretty big upgrades to the offensive line. Then you look at the defense, pretty much status quo here, just going through the draft. Really, they only added 1 free agent on this side of the ball, really, and that was Nick Scott at the safety group, which is the only position group that is downgraded here on the defensive side of the ball because they lose Jesse Bates, an all-pro caliber free safety, and Von Bell. Another very good safety heads to Carolina. They also added Jordan Battle, by the way, in the 3rd round. He's not slated to start right now, but yeah, I mean, pretty obviously that safety room is going to be downgraded on paper and is going to be the one kind of question mark for this defense heading into the year, as we'll see later. But I do think the rest of the defense got better. They didn't change anything on the interior defensive line. I didn't even list the fact that they're hoping to get a full season out of DJ Reader this time around, where he played, he missed, I think, the first 8 games last year, something like that. But just going to leave interior defensive line as neutral. Edge is upgraded. They spent a first-round pick on Miles Murphy and lost nobody. Linebacker is neutral. They really didn't have to do anything there after they retained Jermaine Pratt. And then cornerback is upgraded as well. They lose Eli Apple, who ultimately, while polarizing, was just fine for them. Also Trey Flowers, who played a dime corner matchup role for them. But they get Chidobe Awuzie back, who got hurt, week 5 last year, only played 38% of their snaps. And they also spent a second-round pick on DJ Turner. So I do have cornerback as upgraded. Hopefully that can compensate a little bit for the loss of those safeties that we talked about. They also spent a 7th-round pick on DJ Ivey. And then in terms of kicker punter, they are having some shakeup with the punter room. Not going to be difficult for this to be an upgrade. Kevin Huber, Drew Chrisman, very, very low-level punters last year. They spent a 6th-round pick on Brad Robbins. So call it neutral, call it to be determined, whatever. But we'll talk more about each position group in depth as we get into the roster breakdown for this video here. But first, I do want to talk about this coaching staff, how they stack up against the rest of the league, and what this team's going to look like schematically on both sides of the ball. And it was kind of weird. Zach Taylor, in his, 4th year as head coach of the Bengals, had like a breakout season as a head coach, which is pretty weird. But and it's especially weird because they went to the Super Bowl in 2021. But even after that year, heading into last season, I and many people, Bengals fans included, had questions of if Zach Taylor was like a Super Bowl caliber head coach and if he was in over his head a little bit. For the first few years of his time in Cincinnati, it really felt like he just brought Sean McVay's playbook over with the wide zone, the play action shots, some of the quick game stuff they did there, and just tried to make that fit in Cincinnati without making a ton of adjustments, not to mention the idea that he was super predictable with his first down calls. And it got to the point of being pretty frustrating with the Bengals, and that even showed up in the first 4 or 5 weeks of the season last year. But man, Zach Taylor and Brian Callahan, who also deserves a lot of credit here, really had this kind of coming to Jesus moment in, was it week 5 or week 6 for that Saints game, where they finally kind of looked at this thing and said, you know what? We don't have a roster built to run the Shanahan-style offense that Zach Taylor kind of brought over with him from the Rams. And that's because, the offensive linemen they had paid in free agency were thumping between the tackles guys, not these athletic move blockers. You had a guy like T. Higgins that wasn't necessarily being wasted, but you think Shanahan offense, you think speed, benders, run after catch, attacking the middle of the field. T. Higgins is much better utilized working the sidelines and more of a pro-style / spread type of offense. Even Joe Mixon himself is probably a better between the tackles runner than he is a wide zone kind of guy. And then, of course, Joe Burrow, your quarterback. It's you don't need a Shanahan system that's predicated on play action and basically doing the thinking for your quarterback when you have Joe Burrow, who's one of the 2 or 3 smartest quarterbacks in the NFL in terms of dropping back, reading a defense, getting the ball out quickly, and operating a more spread-style offense. So there you go. Week 6, they say, why don't we replicate the Chiefs' offense a little bit? Look at what the Eagles are having success with. Maybe the Jags for the start of the season. And they looked around the league and they were like, that style of offense fits us much better. And they, early to mid-season, just completely tore up the playbook and changed their scheme as if it was a Madden setting. And that's really impressive that they were able to do that, keep it in stride all the way up to the AFC Championship. So we saw way more shotgun on early downs, running more inside zone out of shotgun, mixing in gap and trap stuff out of the shotgun, more read options with Joe Burrow, and an increase in the amount of RPOs and quick game, and just letting Joe Burrow's arm with these receivers be an extension of the run game on earlier downs. And it just was this breath of fresh air. It opened everything up. The offense that really was frustrating. And, you know, when you have Joe Burrow and these receivers, like, you're not going to have a bad offense, but it clearly wasn't as good as it could have been. They made the scheme change, and they took off, man. Joe Burrow's efficiency was incredible from that point on. Everything was better. So a ton of credit to Zach Taylor and to Brian Callahan, who, you know, it's tough to know exactly who to credit for that shift. I think Callahan definitely deserves 40-50% of it. I mean, Callahan comes from much more of those modern pro spread style offenses, especially working with John Gruden most recently for the Raiders. But, you know, you look at like Adam Gase, kind of reminds me of his offense a little bit. So there was a little bit more of those modern kind of shotgun, quick hitting spread types of offensive influences there. So I think that definitely played a factor. And for that reason, you got to think Brian Callahan, a young offensive mind, I think he's 39 years old, is going to be pretty high on people's lists in terms of potential head coach candidates here heading into 2023. Now, I'm not going to completely forget about the 3 years of frustrating play calls and just assume all of a sudden this is a top-tier offensive coaching staff, but it's definitely heading in the right direction. I've got them really in like the top half of the league there, the tier 3 in my rankings for both pass game and run game coaching. In terms of like Zach Taylor's leadership and ranking him as a head coach, I've got them in tier 2 for team culture, which is towards the top 10 in the NFL. I think the Bengals do have a great leadership structure in place and a good locker room. Zach Taylor deserves credit for that. I do like his overall charisma and leadership for sure. And I rank him as the 15th head coach for now. But if they continue to kind of prove out and take a look at this new style offense over a full summer where they can really write a playbook for these Bengals, you know, Zach Taylor could very quickly enter the kind of top 10 head coaching ranks, in my opinion. But what's cool is that, you know, talking positively about this staff doesn't stop there. In fact, it gets even more optimistic as we talk about Lou Anarumo. And, you know, I tweeted out yesterday, why don't the Bengals get as much respect as maybe I'm giving them here? Or like, for example, I dropped the Eagles yesterday, and a lot of people were like, no way the Bengals should be ahead of the Eagles. And a lot of people said their defense is just average. And I'm like, what defense have you been watching? The Bengals have had a top 10 defense for 2 years. And this man right here, Lou Anarumo, is the reason you get those results, even if the roster talent isn't what, say, the Eagles or some of these other teams have. And I struggled whether to put Lou Anarumo in tier 1 for defensive coaching for these rankings just to make a point. I have him in tier 2, but I mean, he's at the top of tier 2, and I'm going to be honest, I think next year I'm going to go back to just ranking them head up and just have a few more ties with these, by the way, with these rankings. But anyway, Lou Anarumo is incredible. He, I think, is right behind like Bill Belichick in terms of the ability to really scout your opponent and know what they want to do and then get into the game and kind of have that chess match of not just game planning to take away your opponent's strengths, but also making adjustments within the game. He really is a special play caller / X's and O's defensive guru. And what's crazy is he's been around for a decade before he kind of had this breakout. And he himself has had a little bit of a come to Jesus moment as a defensive coordinator. But you look at these playoff runs that the Bengals have been on, and obviously Joe Burrow is awesome, and I'm not trying to take anything away from him. You guys that have been around the channel know I'm a big Joe Burrow guy, but the reality is this Bengals defense has been the reason that they got to the Super Bowl in 2021, what helped them get to the NFC Championship, the AFC Championship, not trying to pull a cowherd here, in last season. But man, like his ability to have this liquid defense that 1 week can be a 3-4, 1 week can be a 4-3 up front. 1 week they're man heavy, the next week they're quarters heavy, and the week after that they're blitz zero heavy. Like they are so adaptable, and now they've just had more and more continuity with this roster outside of the safety group, and it's a really, really unique defense in terms of game planning and scheme and just overall preparation. It's really a thing of beauty. I don't think they get enough credit for it, and I wanted to try to highlight that to the best of my ability here for Lou Anarumo and this Bengals staff. But before we get into the roster breakdown here, I got to tell you guys about the sponsor for today's video, Underdog Fantasy. The season is just around the corner, which means their pick'em contests are about to hit full force with the NFL regular season starting. I'm sure you guys have seen the screenshots of people sharing their underdog slips where you string together anywhere from 2 to 5 players where you're selecting player stats, anything from fantasy points, passing yards, rushing touchdowns, you name it. You pick higher or lower based on the numbers that Underdog sets. And you can win up to 20 times your money if you go 5 for 5 there. It's not just big payouts, though. This is the best way to increase your interest in any given, crappy Thursday night football game, or you want the full Sunday football slate. You can get that too. I'll be playing Underdog every single day that there is football going on this season. And right now, if you sign up at Underdog using promo code TFG, not only will you support my channel and this series, but they will match up to $100 on that first deposit. That is easily a full season's worth of extra pick'em lineups there. So that is promo code TFG at Underdog Fantasy, and good luck. But let's get into the roster, ranking each position group, how they stack up against the rest of the league. And that's going to start with the quarterback room, where the Bengals rank second in the league. And it's been so fun to see Joe Burrow ascend to this really kind of consensus elite quarterback tier. I think everyone kind of agrees Mahomes is like tier 1A, and then you've got a couple other guys that are like tier 1B, but in the sense of the word, Joe Burrow is still an elite quarterback, however you want to tier it. And it's been fun for me to see really one of my favorite draft takes of all time play out, where, Joe Burrow coming out, I said was Tom Brady from the waist up and Aaron Rodgers from the waist down. And I don't think that could have played out really any better. Like, the only exception is maybe Tom Brady does have a slightly stronger arm, but you talk about waist up, Joe Burrow having the same kind of leadership and just unwillingness to lose that Tom Brady had. The work ethic is all there, but also the processing, the decision making, the ability to read defenses, throw with anticipation, and then the arm talent as well, being above the waist, in the sense that, Tom Brady never had the strongest arm in the NFL. Like I said, I think it was a little bit stronger than Joe Burrow's if you want to nitpick, but the accuracy, the arm talent being really accurate despite not having this piss missile of an arm. And then waist down being that mobility, the pocket presence, the it factor to extend plays, to navigate pressure with almost like a sixth sense to keep your eyes downfield and knowing when and how to use his feet to extend plays. That's the Aaron Rodgers in Joe Burrow's game. And it really combines for this elite quarterback. And man, like, you look at how he played after the scheme change last year, that's much better fit for him to, utilize the deep outside the numbers passing game, where even if he doesn't have a rocket arm, he's really accurate, hitting T. Higgins and Jamar Chase and giving those great receivers a chance to make catches that a lot of receivers can't make, but you still need an accurate ball 40 yards down the field if they're going to give him that chance. But also just his efficiency went through the roof. He did have a rougher start with the older scheme, and then they made this change, and he was really second to only Patrick Mahomes in terms of who the best quarterback in the NFL was last year. And for that reason, he might just be getting started. Like, I do think with a full offseason and full regular season of this more kind of spread them out, throw them out style of offense, if you will, he very well might get into the MVP conversation and win Super Bowls and all that stuff. Like, it's exciting where we're headed with Joe Burrow. While there's a lot of great things going on in Cincinnati here, he's ultimately the number one reason why the Bengals rank number 2, obviously. So, ranked number 2 there. Joe Burrow's elite. Got to get him healthy and got to keep him healthy. He's coming off that preseason ankle injury. And, he might sit down week 1. I don't know if they've made an announcement on that, honestly. if you got to swallow a loss against one of the best pass rushes in the NFL against Cleveland, it's not ideal, but I think they can handle it. I'm not terribly worried about the injury, but I do hope they kind of are a little bit, lean a little bit on the side of caution, at least for week 1. But yeah, there's your quarterback room. Pretty straightforward. We know who Joe Burrow is. The depth is arguably the worst in the league. Jake Browning, entirely unproven, undrafted talent. It is a little bit strange that they didn't want to go bring in like a Colt McCoy or, some more of a relatively proven backup in case you have to, sit Joe Burrow for a week or two. But, I'm sure they view that as, some teams value backup quarterbacks. Some teams don't. They probably just want to save every bit of money they can because they got some big contracts coming up. So I understand that side of things too. But let's talk about these weapons, which are sensational, well-documented, elite weaponry here. Now, talk about earlier in the video, I talked about sometimes ratings slide and adjust. And I was looking back on this, and I do want to have San Francisco and Miami ranked just ahead of the Bengals here in terms of weaponry. I originally had the Bengals number 1. And I think the overall dynamism and explosiveness of those other two groups sets them slightly ahead, although that's not a knock on this group, right? They're all kind of lumped together with the Eagles as well in this elite tier of weaponry, and they have it here in Cincinnati. You've got true complementary skill sets with all of the different pieces here. You've got your alpha, Jamar Chase, who can line up anywhere in the slot where he can play physical and be a short to intermediate threat. His run after catch ability is tops in the league. Really anywhere you want to put him behind Deebo Samuel. He's big and fast and ruthless after the catch. And then you pair that with his deep ball ability, his ability to win these sensational catches down the field, and his back shoulder chemistry with Joe Burrow. It's all just so special. And I even have the arrow pointing up on Jamar Chase. It's only year 3 for him. He missed significant time last year, so he hasn't quite had that like Cooper Kupp, Justin Jefferson, Tyreek Hill season, if you will, statistically speaking. But we know it's there. It does feel like one of these years he's going to be a quarterback, a receiver that leads the NFL in receiving yards and all that. But he's an elite weapon. We all know it. And then you have T. Higgins, who, T's got to be the best number 2 receiver in the NFL, right? Like, he would be the number 1 on 16 teams in the NFL. And I actually think he's surpassed Mike Evans for the best, like, true X. And when I say that, I'm when I think about an alpha wide receiver, I think of a guy like Jamar Chase, can line up inside and out, run every route in the book, really do whatever you ask of him at a high level, demand double teams, all that stuff. T. Higgins is great at what he does, but he's a little bit more one-dimensional, right? He's more of a linear athlete, work the sidelines, run a dig, a stop route, a slant. It's not a knock on T. Higgins. It's just there's less you can do with him. But there are even weeks, depending on the matchup, where T. Higgins is Joe Burrow's number 1 wide receiver. His ability to win balls on the outside is quite possibly the best in the league right now. Just such a great combination of size, hands, play strength, body control, field awareness in terms of knowing where the sideline is. Like, that matters when you're getting all these throws that are like on the white line from Joe Burrow. So I just took him in a fantasy draft. Like, I really think he is going to be basically, whether you want to talk real football or fantasy football, a wide receiver 1 this year. Maybe fantasy is like wide receiver 14 or whatever, but don't let Jamar Chase overshadow T. Higgins. Burrow loves T. Higgins. There's plenty of volume to go around nowadays, especially in this new style offense. And these guys are incredible. And then you have Tyler Boyd, which rounds this out as, I think, the best wide receiver trio in the NFL. Tyler Boyd's a little bit one-dimensional. He's a slot guy. He works the kind of short to intermediate really well. But in terms of digs and slants and kind of being an afterthought in the short to intermediate part of the field, because teams are so worried about these outside targets, he's really the ideal option. Now, there's weeks where he disappears and just isn't really used, but it's not like he disappears because he's dropping the ball a bunch or not coming down with tough catches. He's just there when they need him. I do think this is probably his last year in Cincinnati. He's heading into the last year of his deal, and they still have to pay both Chase and Higgins, and I think they will, by the way, pay both these guys, despite all the conversation that they'll lose T. Higgins. But Boyd is going to be 29 years old, looking for a last contract, if you will. So this year kind of is their window with these three. But that said, love the Charlie Jones pick. One of my favorite kind of day three no-brainer picks, because this team's going to lose Tyler Boyd. Charlie Jones projects as a really good starting receiver in the NFL. He's polished, man. I think he's 24 years old. Started his career at Iowa. Ended up, I think, following Aiden O'Connell to Purdue, and from week one with Purdue, he was the number one option in that offense. But they played him outside and inside. I think at the NFL level, he does lack the size to kind of stack and be a vertical presence on the outside. But in terms of his acceleration into his route, reminds me a lot of some guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown and Cooper Kupp, where they can get into that second level of the field like that. And in a league that's running a lot of zone, like kind of off zone and allowing free releases, that's a nasty asset. So that's the first thing I think about with Charlie Jones, but he's a great punt returner as well. He's the reason that kind of we're willing to move on from Trent Taylor. I think Charlie Jones is going to be their starting punt returner. Definitely for dynasty leagues. I mean, if you want the next Tyler Boyd for cheap, Charlie Jones is there. It's probably too late for your dynasty drafts, but maybe someone to see if he's available in free agency or something like that. But anyway, big fan of that pick for the future. Now, wide receiver 4 is probably going to be Trenton Irwin. He's got a nice chemistry with Joe Burrow. Bigger-bodied guy, somewhat reliable. He's fine as a wide receiver 4, no complaints. And then they also draft Andre Iosivas. He's more of that traits-based, small school developmental type of piece. Did show out in the preseason, talented guy. Probably went a round later than he should have, maybe 2 rounds. Traits are there, but as long as they keep Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, he's probably just going to hang around as depth as he kind of competes over time. Now, part of the reason I didn't quite feel comfortable leaving them as the number 1 group of weapons in the NFL is the tight end room. And I know some people are going to say, well, Miami doesn't have any tight ends. Well, Miami doesn't really use their tight ends. Cincy will actually use their tight ends a decent amount. And there might be some frustrating moments from guys like Irv Smith and Drew Sample. They're just not established, consistent receiving threats. Now, I'm interested in Irv Smith here, but he faded out really quickly in Minnesota. He's a guy that's hurt every year. He's struggled with drops last year too. It's a fine enough signing, but like I said, I think there's going to be a couple frustrating moments with him scattered randomly throughout the season, whether that's injuries or drops or whatever. Does have some speed and mismatchability though. And then Drew Sample is a pretty good blocker, but has yet to prove himself out as a receiving target. Decent enough athlete to turn into that player. I am intrigued, Yeah, I do think Irv will probably get banged up at some point. Sample, in theory, should be the next man up in that situation. Tight end is oftentimes a developmental position, and he very much was a more developmental pick in the second round in 2019. And, I think they felt pretty good about him getting an opportunity last year, but his season was cut short. So they did bring him back on a 1-year deal to kind of give him another 4th year, another contract year. So, I guess we'll sort of keep an eye on him, but not expecting much there. Ultimately, Mitchell Wilcox is a kind of classic, whatever, backup. So the tight end room it's not that great. It's towards the bottom in the league and in the league in terms of tight end talent. The running backs, though, I expect to be pretty good in the receiving game. Joe Mixon's a pretty consistent, 400-yard receiver. He's a good, balanced overall receiving back in terms of hands, instincts, consistency. Last year did look like he was slowing down a little bit, but I still think he'll be productive in the receiving game. But there are some kind of threats behind him. Chris Evans, I do think, they did play Samaje Perine a ton, by the way, on third downs last year because of the pass protection aspect that Joe Mixon hasn't been quite as good at. So whoever of this group steps up in pass protection might see a pretty significant bump in their receiving production. I couldn't really tell you who that's going to be. All these guys are quote-unquote undersized backs, but really all of Travion Williams, Chase Brown, Chris Evans have shiftiness and athletic traits to be good receiving threats as well. I will, as a last note, say Chris Evans was sensational at the Senior Bowl running routes, and he looked like a slot receiver out there at times with some of his skills in the receiving game. So he's the one I'm most optimistic about, but Chase Brown, too, was productive in the receiving game at Illinois. So, again, we'll kind of wait and see how that group plays out. I don't think Mixon's going to be getting 1,300 snaps or whatever total number of snaps they have offensively. I think they are going to try to mix some of these guys in. But yeah, I think the Bengals have the best combination of quarterback and weaponry in the NFL, and I don't know that that's all that controversial. But let's talk about those backs a little bit more in terms of how they actually are as running backs. And this was an example of me watching the film and actually having to lower my grade on them. I thought I was going to walk away continuing to be as impressed by Joe Mixon as I've been over the years, but he did look like some tread was setting in on the tires there. Didn't seem to have quite the same explosiveness, especially once he kind of got to that second level. Wasn't as consistent at making safeties and linebackers miss, and that showed up in the stat sheet too. Only 3.9 yards per carry. He only had 6 carries of over 15 yards. Really a career low in missed tackles forced. PFF has some metrics called elusiveness rating and breakaway percentage, near career lows and all those. This is a guy that has over 1,300 attempts on his career at this point. He's starting to have some off-field stuff start to pop back up after it looked like he had cleaned up his act after being kind of a scumbag in college. Straight up. So souring on Joe Mixon a little bit. I think the Bengals are souring on Joe Mixon a little bit. He's still a good back. He's just, the old verbiage that Joe Mixon never fumbles was true last year. That still holds value. No fumbles on 210 carries. That's like a quarterback that doesn't throw interceptions, right? That still matters. Still has good vision and an ability to fight for difficult yardage in between the trenches. So he's not a bad back. He still helps the Bengals rank 11th in the league, but there's been times where I've seen him as a borderline top 5 runner and a truly high-end impact on the run game, and I don't feel that way about him anymore. I think he's just he's a good back, not a great back, and it definitely feels like this is kind of the beginning of the end for Mixon here. Though I think he'll still have a productive season because there's just not a ton of proven options behind him. Right now, Travion Williams is slated to be the backup. He, like Drew Sample, was a 2019 pick that the Bengals wanted to kind of bring back and give another year with added opportunities. So they like aspects of his game, clearly. We'll see. I had to go back to watch his college highlights because I didn't even really remember what I had on him. And, he's got some shiftiness, and he really just hasn't had a lot of workload in the NFL at all. But, we'll see what he can do. I do love the Chase Brown pick, though, man. I thought he was more of a late day 2, early day 3 caliber pick. They end up getting him kind of more mid day 3. And he's a super explosive athlete, really shifty in space, ultra productive. He was the Illini's offense. He had, I think, close to 2,000 total yards last year between his on the ground and through the air. So we know he can produce. It's just vision was really bad. They're going to have to kind of get in his head a little bit and say, look, you can't bounce everything outside. And you have to, push the line of scrimmage on these inside runs. They're going to have to coach him up. He's kind of the rare developmental running back in that way. Also, fumbles, a big deal for him. So he's going to have to prove himself before he gets an opportunity here, but there is potential for him to break out even this year, and even potential for him to overtake Joe Mixon as the next kind of day 3 back that turns into a nice starter in the NFL, all, Isaiah Pacheco, Aaron Jones. The list goes on and on at this point, right? So it's not unthinkable, but he does have to prove it. And then you got, Chris Evans. I think if he makes an impact, it will be in the receiving game where he could be a special receiving back, but he's not much of a runner ultimately. So, a solid ranking of 11th. Clearly not trashing Joe Mixon there, and that might even still be higher than a lot of people would rank the Bengals. But it's not a game-changing group or anything like that. Now, they do get a solid boost from Joe Burrow in the run game, because they have gone to more of this spread-style approach. They do want to mix in and put some read options on film just to kind of get defenses thinking about it. Burrow's got good acceleration and is an effective runner. He had 350 rushing yards total last year. Like he's a decent threat there. So his athleticism and how they use him is a boost, though it's not going to be anything crazy because they're going to want to keep him healthy and avoid hits. But he's pretty good at sliding and not taking hits on those keepers. But let's talk about this offensive line, which I do think is an improved group and even a slightly underrated group based on some of the conversations I've seen about this group on Twitter and in the YouTube comments. But this I do think is the best offensive line Joe Burrow has had since he's been a Bengal. Maybe even the best O-line he's had going back to LSU, which was not the best group. But it's actually enough where I have them ranked just inside the top 10 for pass blocking. Not quite as good in run blocking, though, where they're 22nd. Overall, a mid offensive line where they rank 15th. But bringing in Orlando Brown, it's funny how some conversations just come back to earth. Initially, when Orlando Brown wanted to be the highest paid tackle and demanded, a high draft pick trade from the Chiefs to go get him and all this stuff, I was pretty anti Orlando Brown. But ultimately, he's still a good left tackle, right? He's somewhere around the 16th best left tackle in the NFL, and he was just compensated as such. Got paid like, what was it, $16.5, $17 million? That's fair compensation for Orlando Brown based on his play. He's a rangy pass protector, though sometimes his foot speed does lead to some pretty ugly losses that get thrown around on social media, and it's worth a good laugh because, he's a clunky 365-pound athlete. His combine was one of the worst in recent memory, and sometimes that lack of foot speed does hurt him. But for the most part, gets out of his stance quickly. He's so wide and strong that he just is a difficult tackle to get around, and you really can't get through him either. His anchor is about as good as it gets in pass protection. So he's a good, if not imperfect, pass protector. And then his play strength makes him a good run blocker too, especially in a head-up run blocking scheme like this. Downhill, pushing a defensive end back in inside zone or power, down blocking and stuff. He's good at that. If this was more of a wide zone offense like it was maybe a year ago, I'd be less optimistic about this signing because he can't get out and reach block, but they're not going to do a ton of that anymore. It's a big reason why I was trying to tell Bears fans, you're not getting Orlando Brown. He wouldn't be good there. But this is a scheme fit that works for a very scheme-dependent offensive lineman. And at the end of the day, it's funny to say I love the signing after all of the kind of negative things I've said about Orlando Brown, but that's just because he thought he was an elite tackle and deserved to be paid as such, and he hit the open market finally and had a little bit of a reality check there, but now we've settled in where things should be. Now, next to him at left guard, you have a weak link in Cordell Volson. Now, I'm cautiously optimistic that once Lyle Collins comes off the PUP list, they'll come to their senses and move on from Volson. It's so crazy, eerily familiar to what the Packers have gone through over the last 2 years with a guy like Royce Newman, where sometimes these teams are just stubborn and they say, well, our offensive line as a whole has been pretty good despite this guy, and now that he has starting experience, we view him as a starter. But you watch the tape and it's like, no, that's a backup playing with a good group. And there are games where Volson turns into a turnstile at left guard. So he is a potential weak link. It's not ideal, but Lyle Collins does have experience playing guard, and I'm going to stay cautiously optimistic that this staff will put him in, and that's going to help this group look a little bit better than it does right now, where Volson's the left guard, though it is something to monitor. teams don't always make the correct personnel decisions, seemingly, especially along the offensive line. And then you've got your two free agent signings from last year at center and right guard. I can almost talk about these guys pretty much at the same time. They're very kind of similar style players. Neither are the best athletes in terms of the wide zone blocking that they initially wanted to do. But both are strong, heady, interior guys on the inside. And they're just good, balanced players, Kappa and Ted Karras. These two signings really helped this offensive line take a step forward last year. Now you put Orlando Brown in the mix, and we might see another step forward. And then I like Jonah Williams at right tackle as well. He was initially unhappy with it. Maybe that gives him a little bit of a chip on his shoulder, but he really had no right to stand his ground and say, I am a left tackle. It's like, you were pretty mid at left tackle last year. You've been pretty mid at left tackle. It's good to see they've worked things out, and he's going to be their starting right tackle. I'm honestly okay with this. I know he's got some ugly losses. He doesn't have the best play strength in the world, and that just hurts his overall consistency. But I think ultimately he's a solid right tackle and is actually probably better than what they were getting at right tackle last year, at least in pass protection from Lyle Collins and whoever else they had to play, like Akeem Adeniji and whoever else at right tackle. But you do have some added flexibility there, right? Because you do have Lyle Collins, who can play right tackle and is still a great run blocker. It's just the pass blocking did look pretty clunky and problematic for him last year. But also Jackson Carman, a second-round pick a couple years ago. He stepped in late last season at left tackle, and he looked like a new man. I mean, he looked like he had improved his technique across the board. He looked quicker. I think they should be really encouraged by what they saw from him. So their depth and flexibility is really something they haven't been able to be used to here in Cincinnati. I even like Deontay Smith heading into another year of development. Fluid athlete, solid technique coming out. If he's put on a couple pounds in the weight room, there could be something there. You could do worse in terms of interior depth. You've got Max Sharping, who started a lot of games in the NFL. He's very Cordell Volson-esque, where, yes, he's started, but has been a problem when he has started. Cody Ford, likewise, similar thought process there. And then Trey Hill is fascinating as well. He stepped in and played well in a backup role last year. He was a kind of draft and develop higher upside SEC starter. Don't mind him buried down the depth chart. So it's, like I said, it's a pretty good offensive line. You're going to have some questions about how things play out with left guard. But overall, I think this is an offensive line that's, they've survived despite below average offensive line play to bad offensive line play since Joe Burrow's been here. And I think this is the first year where they have at least average to above average offensive line play. And that's pretty exciting. So let's recap the offense. They come out as my number 2 passing game in the NFL. It's obviously a big reason why they rank number 2 in my overall rankings. And then right in the middle of the road for run game, 16th in the league. So this is a plus offense, not a huge surprise. Let's talk about the defense, and starting with the defensive line here. Very underrated group, I think, especially in terms of Trey Hendrickson, who even I'm guilty of underrating him at times. I mean, he was awesome last year. He was right there with some of these kind of tier 2 rushers last year. Guys like Hassan Reddick and Joey Bosa, maybe Zadarius Smith, Daniil Hunter. I was skeptical when they signed him, but he's gotten better in both seasons since he came over from New Orleans, where he wasn't a full-time starter, and he's really taken those starting reps and continued to just grow his pass rushing plan and tool belt. He's got the kind of baseline of athletic traits you look for in terms of get off and ability to convert speed to power, but he's got different pass rush moves too. He's bendy around the corner. He's reached the point where I feel comfortable saying he's a number 1 rusher. And I don't know that he necessarily gets credit for that. Like, I don't think it'd be popular to say, give me Trey Hendrickson over guys like Brian Burns or Jaguars' Josh Allen. But at least in terms of where they're at now and what they've proven, you can't really argue otherwise. So he's pretty sweet, but the rest of the group here is pretty average, and that's how they end up with the 17th ranked pass rush in the NFL. It's still a good group, but it's not towards the top of the league or anything like that. You got Sam Hubbard on the other side, and I think Hubbard's like the most basic number 2 edge rusher in the league. He's a super high effort guy. He's got good quickness, and he's super reliable in terms of durability and just kind of having that gap discipline and just reliability, knowing what you're getting from him. There's value to that. The best ability is availability, right? So they like him for that. And he helps out this run defense that I'm going to rave about momentarily in a way that Trey Hendrickson doesn't necessarily. Hendrickson, I think, maybe saves a little bit more gas for third down and doesn't quite have the length to defend the run in the way that Hubbard does. So he's a nice compliment in that way in terms of setting the edge. But, he's really not an exciting pass rusher because of the number of snaps that he ends up playing. He's going to naturally end up with 6 or 7 sacks and even like 50-plus pressures. So the total number looks good, but it's more volume production than it is efficiency for him. And then what they're hoping for is growth from some of these young guys so that you can have a little bit more of an efficient rusher to come in on third down. And that's still going to be a little bit wait and see, but I'm kind of optimistic that either or both Joseph Asai and or Myles Murphy can provide a little bit of some extra pass rush juice that they haven't necessarily had. But it's going to be wait and see there. But Osai missed his rookie year, was viewed by many as a total steal when they got him in the draft. A really good balanced pass rusher. Maybe did fall a little bit because he's not much of a run defender, but that does make him a nice compliment to a guy like Sam Hubbard to make him a little bit more of a, third down rotation there with Hubbard. And I think he's going to play with a chip on his shoulder with the way the season ended, too. The unfortunate push out of bounds just kind of is what it is. I don't know that Bengals fans are necessarily holding that over him because he was a player that finished the year strong and showed a lot of promise. But they're obviously, not counting on that and obviously are looking for a more efficient number 2 rusher because they spent a number 1 pick on Myles Murphy. And because you've already got Hubbard and Asai and even Cam Sample, who we haven't talked about yet, I don't think we see a ton from Myles Murphy this year. I'm sure they'll sprinkle in some third downs and let him get some reps. But he is a little bit more raw. Was a fascinating prospect where he was much better in his true sophomore season than his true junior season. But there's a lot of traits there. They're hoping with NFL coaching and good kind of mentors around him, which he's got here. Year 2, year 3, he can become a potential star defensive end for them. So I'm not going to rule that out, but I'm really not expecting a ton from him this year, even if it was a good pick. And then Cam Sample's just a really solid rotational piece. He hasn't been able to kind of put the whole package together in terms of consistency, but he's a bigger bodied end with like a ton of play strength and quickness and speed for a guy his size, a useful player that, they'll kind of play on whatever down they see fit for him. And he's going to continue to get some snaps and take some reps away from a guy like Myles Murphy, I think. So it is a really deep edge group. They haven't had this type of depth in years past, and I'm excited to watch them. Now, the interior duo it's weird. You don't see a ton of groups that are much more centered on the run defense on the interior. In this modern league, everyone's kind of looking for that speedy 3-tech that can shoot gaps and be a plus pass rusher. The Bengals don't really have that. They were kind of trying to find that in Zay Carter, who, let's just say right now, he sucks. I couldn't believe they took him in the 3rd round, and he was horrible in his rookie year. Hope the guy develops, but he was a problem for them trying to get anything out of him. But back to the starters, it's a true nose tackle and a more throwback 3 technique in BJ Hill. A lot of teams would take a guy like BJ Hill and say, you're our nose tackle in the modern game. But no, they've got beef and play strength. And just this, to me, is the best run defending interior duo in the National Football League. And I would say DJ Reader is the best run defending defensive tackle in the NFL. Now, Dexter Lawrence made a case for that last year, and that's fair. I think Reader's been doing it a little bit longer. And I think he's just more instinctive and better at getting off blocks than a guy like Vita Vea, who's, no discredit to him, but man, I said it in last year's deep dive that this guy's underrated, and finally, once he got back on the field last year, people started to say, oh my God, look how much better the run defense is when DJ Reader's out there. It's like, yeah, no shit. Watch the guy play. He's incredible. He can legit decimate double teams. There's nobody that can say that they do that with the consistency that DJ Reader does. He's got the shed strength. He's massive, instinctive, as I said. What's not to love about DJ Reader as a run defender? And getting him for a full season is awesome. Now, as a pass rusher, his play strength and tenacity shows up. He will have pass rush wins. He can move the pocket a little bit. But the lateral agility and get off aren't necessarily there to be a plus kind of star pass rusher. But he's all right. He helps. He contributes. And then BJ Hill, I mean, what a trade this was from this front office. They sent Billy Price for BJ Hill, which was such a dumb trade by Dave Gettleman and always was. But BJ Hill is a super valuable, good starting defensive tackle that gets to play 3-tech here, which really is ideal. When he's had to play nose tackle, it hasn't been quite as pretty because he's just not as big and strong as DJ Reader, but he's super disciplined, plays with good pad level, good play strength against the run, and he himself has a little bit more quickness and gap shooting ability as a pass rusher than a guy like DJ Reader. So they're a nice complementary group, though, again, you don't really have that high-end pass rusher on the inside, and there's games where you can feel that those step-up lanes are pretty clean. But not always. In terms of depth, you've got another defensive tackle type that's played okay in DJ Reader's absence in Josh Tupou. Useless pass rusher there, but a useful rotational D tackle. We mentioned Zach Carter. Show me something, man. Didn't show it to me at Florida. I've praised this front office a lot, but definitely did not praise them for that pick. I think I gave that an F, and yeah, it was rough in both phases. Not only was he as bad in run defense as you would expect based on his Florida film, but he was literally, I think, the least efficient pass rusher in all of football. He had 189 pass rush snaps. That's a decent number of pass rush snaps. 395 total snaps. Again, on 189 pass rush snaps, 4 pressures. It's less than 2% of his snaps he impacted the pass. Got to be better, man. Got to be better. And for a guy that is getting relatively significant playing time, you can make a case he's one of the worst players in the National Football League right now. But then you got Jay Tufele, who they kind of poached from Jacksonville, I believe. I thought he was a decent mid-round prospect. Maybe he could show some growth this year, guy out of USC. But they do come out as my number 1 ranked D-line run defense in the NFL. They get the crown there. I mentioned the best interior duo there. You got a solid depth piece in Tupou. You got a plus run defending edge in Sam Hubbard. And then Trey Hendrickson at least tries against the run, even if he has some bad reps. So, and they'll rotate him with a guy like Cam Sample, who's a pretty solid run defender off the edge. So if you like throwback football, you're going to like this defensive line. If you're looking for a ultra explosive pass rush, that's not necessarily this group, but they're persistent and get the job done as pass rushers. And they definitely don't hold this group back as a defense as a whole. Overall, by the way, they rank 11th in total D-line. So good group. And then also a good group is this linebacker room, where they rank 8th overall, 5th in coverage, 10th in linebacker run defense. Really just balanced plus duo here. And I love that they retained Jermaine Pratt, who had a breakout year in your classic contract year last year. But your number 1 is Logan Wilson, who's only getting better every year. And he himself is heading into a contract year. He was a 3rd-round pick back in 2020. Really liked his tape coming out of Wyoming. I mean, he's a full-size guy, which isn't always easy to find in the modern league, especially a guy that can still move in space like Logan Wilson has. And, I liked his coverage feel coming out of Wyoming. Definitely needed to, continue learning the speed of the game and run defense, and has needed to clean up his tackling since he came into the league. But that was a big step he took last year. He went from missing, 12% of his tackles in his rookie year to 11% of his tackles in his sophomore year, if you will, to last year, one of the more consistent tacklers in all of football. Only missed 3% of his total tackles, was breaking down runs better, making plays in the backfield. He's still trending up. I truly believe that, especially in a contract year. If Logan Wilson emerges as like a top 5 linebacker in the NFL this year, it's definitely not going to surprise me and not going to surprise a lot of Bengals fans. He's awesome. Really good two-way linebacker, as is Jermaine Pratt, who himself improved a lot of his weaknesses last year. He also basically tripled his tackling consistency that had been an issue for him over the 3 years before that. Also defended 4 passes in coverage, whereas he had only had 3 in his 3 years before that. So I think both these guys, with the added continuity of Lou Anarumo's scheme and good linebacker coaching, like, you got to shout out James Bettcher, who was actually the defensive coordinator ahead of Lou Anarumo, I think, for the Giants back in 2016 or something. So there's a really nice cohesiveness and chemistry between these linebackers and Bettcher and Anarumo. It's just clearly working here. And maybe even Pratt continues to get better. I don't know. But you've also got some pretty solid depth. Akeem Davis-Gaither, I think, has benefited as well from the coaching situation here. And they'll use him as a weak side backer in 4-3 if they want to run 4-3. Like I said, they're super multiple front, and there might be weeks where they want to do that more than others. But he was more of that athletic, undersized, developmental piece coming out of App State, I want to say. So you feel pretty good about him as a cover backer. If they want to even use him as like a dime linebacker type, they can do that. If one of these guys goes down, though, I think you'll be just fine. Like, you still have size. Both Pratt and Wilson are big enough to defend the run. And then Davis-Gaither can be more that undersized complementary piece. So I like him. Might be a guy that, in the way that, say, like Azeez Al-Shahir for the Niners got paid to be a starter for the Titans, wouldn't be surprised if that's Davis-Gaither in a year. Marcus Bailey, Joe Bachie, decent backup types. Don't need to spend too much time on them. But they've also been a part of this room. They just brought back these 5. They didn't add anyone into the mix. I think if you ask them internally, they probably feel like they have one of the best linebacker rooms in the NFL, and I can't fully fault them for thinking that. And while it's difficult for a linebacker room to truly raise the ceiling of a defense, I do think a group like this that is so well-rounded raises the floor for this defense tremendously. But let's talk about the secondary, and this is going to be where you have the most questions for this defense. I think it's going to work out okay for them, though. I've got them ranked 23rd right now. Again, for this series, we're ranking these teams closer to their floor than their ceilings, and there are some young, unproven players here. So 23rd in coverage, but they do rank, by the way, in Tier 2 for DB run support, which is just another kind of weapon in Lou Anarumo's tool belt. Like, the way Mike Hilton specifically defends the run as a slot corner, paired with the fact that these linebackers are good in coverage, allows them to just stay in base nickel and then adapt from there. Because the linebackers can cover with range, and then Mike Hilton can step in and defend the run like a weak side linebacker. So that right there is kind of the core of the flexibility that Lou Anarumo has. But in terms of your coverage there, you've got Chidobe Awuzie coming back. That's an underrated addition for this defense. They had to kind of survive with Eli Apple and Cam Taylor-Britt. It wasn't great what they had to work with on the outside, and they're getting a legit number 1 corner back into the mix in Chidobe Awuzie. Really underrated player, at a breakout year the year before. Awuzie is also 28 years old, heading into a contract season, coming off the injury. He's going to be motivated, just got cleared to play week 1. And he's so perfect here because he can do everything. He can go press man, off zone. He can play the flat with a hard press in cover 2. You name it. And we've talked already about, Lou Anarumo wants that flexibility to go to any coverage he wants to go to any given week. And Chidobe Awuzie is I can't say critical part of it because they were still good at it without him, but such a big piece to do that at a high level. So I'm really excited for the Bengals to kind of get that piece back in here, and it'll allow them to feel more comfortable running man coverage. And it's going to allow a guy like Cam Taylor-Britt to continue to get better because he's not going to have to handle number one receivers every week. And Taylor-Britt was really pleasantly surprising. He was a little bit more streaky coming out of Nebraska, but you could see the tools were there in terms of his athleticism, the fluidity in his movements, and he really stepped in and played at a much better level than I expected. And as the year went on, he got more and more locked in, and he was like he played like a Chidobe Awuzie for the last month of the year into the playoffs. He really was awesome. So the sky is I'm not going to say the sky is the limit, but he's got a high ceiling. And if he really breaks out as a good number two opposite of Awuzie, this could quietly turn into like a top 10 cornerback duo. But we do just need to see that prove out over time for Cam Taylor-Britt. I think Bengals fans are pretty optimistic about him based on how he finished the year last year, though. So I'm cool with that. And then we mentioned Mike Hilton as the slot corner, as an incredible run defender. He's just kind of a steady cover slot. He's one of the slower starting corners in the league. So if you get him exposed on, long developing routes, benders, deep balls, he can fall behind in coverage, but he's quick, he's heady, relatively consistent cover slot paired with his run defense ability makes him one of the better slot corners in the NFL. And then they spent a second-round pick as well on the speedy DJ Turner out of Michigan. And, I think some of this is they looked at Cam Taylor-Britt, needed to clean some things coming out of the Big Ten as a second-round pick, and they think they can speed up DJ Turner's processing at the cornerback position and get an even better player out of him at the next level. Really just gambling on those physical tools at the cornerback position has proved out to be a pretty good strategy for a lot of these teams, especially if you've got good coaching. And Turner's going to have to take to that coaching. His reaction time, his overall stickiness in coverage left a lot to be desired in terms of consistency. Felt like he wasn't tapping into his acceleration and speed as well as he could. But he's got a high ceiling himself. If nothing else, I like him as a kind of fourth matchup corner, like a dime corner, similar to how they used Trey Flowers last year. Different player. Flowers is more of a big tight end eraser, but they can play matchup ball and maybe have someone like Awuzie handle a tight end. And if you're facing an opponent that has like a Marquez Valdez-Scantling, maybe like the Chiefs in the AFC Championship, maybe this is your Marquez Valdez-Scantling eraser. Just someone that can run stride for stride with that vertical threat so that you can continue to be flexible with these safeties. I mean, now that I say that, that literally might be their strategy here, is to help you beat the Chiefs. He might not play all year until you play the Chiefs, and this is so you can just don't get beat over the top with a guy with the speed like DJ Turner and allow you to use those safeties to come down and help on Travis Kelce. That seriously might be why they took him. I don't know. But he does have upside to maybe prove out that he's got good technique, and then you can let Chidobe Awuzie go, save some money so you can afford T. Higgins. Good draft pick. Definitely made sense, but not a given to be a starter either. I'm just going to throw that out there. But I said the same thing about Cam Taylor-Britt last year. Then you got Jalen Davis. He's stuck around. I would assume they like his special teams work. And then they spend that 7th-round pick on DJ Ivey, who, good for him for making the team, but I'm not familiar with his game. We'll see what they get there. Now, obviously you feel pretty good about those corners there, but the main reason they rank 23rd is going to be this safety group is towards the bottom of the league. Now, they're hoping that's not the case, and I'm optimistic that it won't be. Again, we're ranking teams closer to their floor, and anybody that's been around this channel since, last February, when I was hyping up Daxton Hill before the draft, knows I'm a huge fan of Daxton Hill. I thought he was a complete steal when they got him in the draft. Already one of the most athletic starting safeties in the NFL, someone that played a lot of cornerback for Michigan in the slot because they felt like that was how he was going to impact their defense the best, and it was. And for that reason, he's really good in man coverage. He's sticky and quick reaction time, but he is and always was their Jesse Bates replacement. That kind of was very clear when they drafted him, and here we go. Let's see how this plays out. I'm very optimistic. I'm going to have my top 10 breakouts video on Saturday, and spoiler alert, Daxton Hill is going to be very high on that list. But that said, he is replacing Jesse Bates, who's one of the best playmaking free safeties, is ultra consistent as a tackler. Like, those are big shoes to fill. And of course, you're going to look at that and say they might not get as many turnovers forced and give up a few more big plays than they have in years past. And, you know, there are weeks where that could hold this defense back. But I am optimistic that Daxton Hill can actually play relatively close to the level of a Jesse Bates, which is high praise, but just goes to show you how high I am on Dax Hill. And I think this was as good of a succession plan at a safety position that they feel like they didn't want to pay $17 million. Like, that could mostly be T. Higgins money, right? Like, that all kind of adds up over time, and now we're going to get to see it play out. This front office in general has just been really underrated in a lot of their moves lately. But the number 2 safety I'm a little bit more concerned about. You know, Nick Scott just has not been a good cover safety in the NFL. You know, I think they like his physicality. They like his football IQ to kind of plug into this defense. But, man, I'm suspect. He just hasn't been a reliable coverage player for the Rams. There's no way around it. It's going to be a different scheme here, though, and I'm open to the idea of them seeing something in him. But I'm definitely skeptical that he might get overloaded a little bit too much, and you're not going to get a lot of that, a lot from your second safety there. But if it's your second safety that's your issue, you can still have a pretty damn good secondary. Like, if Cam Taylor-Britt and Daxton Hill end up being really good players, you're not going to think too much about Nick Scott. So that's kind of what they're hoping for. Now, they're not fully dependent on him. They did spend a 3rd-round pick on Jordan Battle, who handled a equally difficult scheme with Nick Saban's Bama defense. And I thought that was a really crafty pick in the 3rd round, because he is a do-it-all safety that has tons of experience, reliable tackler, super high floor player. It's just he's not a great athlete, and that's why he was available in the 3rd round. But if Nick Scott's really struggling, I'd be interested to see what Jordan Battle can do back there. And then you got Tyson Anderson, who's more of a developmental, speedy, big-bodied special teamer type. But yeah, I can't rank this group too high, again, coming out 23rd in DB coverage. But I do like the group, and I'm excited to watch this secondary, especially with how Lou Anarumo calls this defense, where they're going to do a little bit of everything. And as we look at the overall defensive ranking, it's obviously not going to hold them back too much. I have them ranked as the 6th overall defense, which I think a lot of people are going to point to the roster and say, that's too high. Well, the results speak for themselves. Lou Anarumo is a special defensive coach. They're a relatively foolproof defense. Like, they don't have a lot of holes. They are the number 1 ranked run defense in the NFL, by the way. Now, pass defense, they rank 14th. But you're talking about a group that's as good as anybody at getting you into 3rd down, and then a group that's about as good as anybody at being adaptable and catering to your offensive focus and game planning to take away what you want to do well. I mean, look no further than what we just talked about with the DJ Turner pick, and, you know, we'll see how that plays out, but I would bet that that's, you know, playing 4D chess, getting ready to have an edge on a team like the Chiefs and scouting for the team that is their biggest threat to get to the Super Bowl. That's the type of stuff that this Bengals team has been doing that I don't think they're quite getting enough credit. And I hope it plays out to the point where they can seal the deal. They've come really close the last 2 years, and I also think this is the best iteration of this Bengals team with some of the improvements they've made and continuity that they've been able to establish. Now, I do got to talk about the special teams a little bit. Really great special teams. They rank in the top 10 of the league there. They are going to have some punter questions, so we'll see how that plays out. But got one of the best kickers in the league. They graded out as one of the best special teams last year in terms of kick coverage. And you look at some of their linebacker and DB depth, and you expect that they're going to be covering kicks and playing hard on that side of the ball yet again. So really like their special teams. Just yet again another spot that is foolproofing this Bengals team. And as we look at their strengths and weaknesses, this is one of my favorite charts that we've seen so far, because They have a solid list of strengths, obviously, as the number 2 team, but perhaps even more importantly, the list of weaknesses and questions is almost nothing, and it's safety, which is one of the least important positions on the football team. And even with that weakness and question of safety, like, they got Dax Hill, who I think is going to be pretty damn good. It's number 2 safety, really, is my question mark. You could argue for left guard. We'll see what they end up doing with that spot, you know, with Lyle Collins coming off the pup in a couple weeks. But then you look at the list of strengths, like, it's not just that they're a balanced high floor team. They got incredible strengths, too. You got an elite quarterback. Yeah, that helps. That matters quite a lot. You got elite weaponry. You got an elite run defense. You've got a great linebacking duo. You have some of the best defensive coaching in the NFL, and you've got a great special teams. This team has a lot to work with. I think they are as well prepared for a Super Bowl run as they've ever been, and they've already been super close. So let's wrap up by taking a look at this schedule. And, I'm going to have my predictions show here in just 2 days on Thursday with my full kind of like foot down predictions. Maybe I will pick the Bengals to win the Super Bowl. I don't know. I haven't decided yet at this point in time. But as far as their Vegas over-under is concerned, it is tough. Their division is arguably the hardest in football, and they have a first-place AFC schedule. On top of that, they have to play at Kansas City and Buffalo, which are, as we know, going to be some of the best games of the year. So with an over-under set at 11.5 wins, that's a lot of games that could go either way, right? It's difficult to say for sure that this team can win 12 or 13 games. They're obviously capable of it, but I don't know if there's necessarily value in terms of betting on it. My formula has them at 10.8 wins as I take my glasses and push them up and tell you, what my calculations have. But I think my gut tells me this team's going to win over 11.5 games there. It's just a really special team, man. But Super Bowl odds at plus 950, I think I like that. I think the Chiefs are like plus 600. The Bengals are right there with the Chiefs. We know they play them super well. Division odds plus 125. It makes sense. It's a tough division. It's tough to find betting value in the AFC, where at the end of the day, it's pretty much a coin toss. Who can make it through the season? Pretty much all these teams are really good. So that is going to do it for our number 2 deep dive, our number 31 deep dive, if you will. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, especially those that were skeptical of me having them over the Eagles. Did I convince you? Am I still out of my mind? Let me know. We'll see you guys tomorrow. We got our last one. It's the Chiefs. And then we got videos coming out throughout the week. We're going to have a live stream with Matthew Colley here. I think it'll probably be after this video drops at 6 p.m. Eastern. We've got the prediction show on Thursday. We've got my weekly picks on Friday, my top 10 breakouts on Saturday. Sunday morning, I'm going to drop like my content schedule for the regular season. We're here, man. It's a good time to be alive, and very excited to be moving forward from this deep dive series. But enough blabbering. Thank you for watching. Please do hit that like button if you haven't already for some reason. And we'll see you soon. Peace out.